Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for the third session of the workshop. This session is going to be moderated by Mr. Yan Bingzong. Mr. Bingzong is the Director of Energy, is the Director at the Department of International Development at the China Renewable Energy Engineering Institute. Since 2006, he has been engaged in the planning and policy research for water resources, hydropower, and new energy. He served as the Deputy Director of Planning Department and the Deputy Director of Scheduling Department. He's now the Director of International Development Department, and he has organized a series of important researches and studies that gained many national prizes and attracted extensive attention worldwide. So, Mr. Yang, please welcome and take us through the sessions.
好的，Thank you, Jack。谢谢 Jack 的介绍啊。很高兴啊，在接下来的2个环节和大家一块儿探讨可再生能源对这个供热和制冷方面的应用啊。今天的这个最近几天啊，北京的这个天气啊也一直是比较阴冷，然后这个天气我刚才看了一下外面，好像天气也是灰蒙蒙的。所以我想在我们这个目前在中国提出的这个碳中和的这个背景下，我们谈这个可再生能源与区域的供热和制冷啊，我觉得非常的应景啊，也非常的及时和必要。我们也非常高兴和IRENA的各位同事啊，共同组织今天我们这个讨论的这个会议。这个环节呢，我们主要围绕着可再生能源和这个余热整合。到区域供热制冷中的可行性的一些框架、条件以及融资和商业模式等等，进行讨论。我想大家应该都很容易理解哈，就是一个产业的发展，除了在技术进步方面做自我的这种更新和发展之外，可能离不开政府。给予的这个政策的支持，同时呢，与金融机构的这种扶持，以及我们产业相关的方面的扶持，都是这个分不开的哈。所以我们今天呢也非常这个荣幸的邀请到了3位专家，主要想就是听他们从这个政策监管，然后支持产业扶持等方面为我们分享他们的观点。我们今天有3位嘉宾，第一位嘉宾是来自我们澳大利亚大学的这个Sarah 先生。Sarah 先生是来自于奥尔本大学可持续能源规划研究小组，他一直致力于可持续能源规划、经济与监管方面的研究工作。他也研究的重点主要是可再生能源系统的。转型的经济和政治方面，然后他参加了可持续能源系统政策、营销、规划相关的有这个多个国际研究项目。他今天在接下来的这个30分钟内，我们有请这个奥尔本大学的Soren 先生为我们做精彩的演讲，欢迎。Ms. Soren? Okay. Please open your microphone.
Sorry, I was unmuted. Sorry. Do you hear me now and see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I will speak a bit about ownership and price regulation of district heating in how it has been done in Denmark. And I usually introduce these presentations by saying a bit about that. It's always a bit more difficult to move regulation across border compared to technology, because technology doesn't really change when you move it from one country to another, while the way we regulate and organize our technologies can be different, and it is different histories and different national contexts that we move into when we go from one country to another. Anyway, I will speak a bit about tell a bit about how it has been done in Denmark, and then I'll try to elevate this to, based on these cases, what are the kind of challenges that you will need to address when you implement district heating. What I will talk about is partly why district heating, and I will not say so much about this because I think also other presentations address this question. And I'll say a bit about where district heating, and that relates also a bit to my main topic, how district heating. So how to plan and regulate district heating. I think it is so that in many countries around the world, and also I think to a large extent in China, we have many good reasons to start expanding and implementing district heating systems. So we have problems such as the CO2 emissions, we have air pollutions in cities, and also especially in the European context, we have also a lot of available labor and low interest rates and so on. So all in all, we see in many countries around the world that the conditions and also the need for district heating is very large, and the conditions is very good. So where should we have district heating? And I think it's important to establish already in a national procedure kind of the overall purpose of district heating. And if you take point of departure in the Danish experiences, then it is quite clear that it is based on a principle of socioeconomic viability. So what you can do is to establish some sort of, for example, national or regional procedure where you start to map and identify the areas where the potential for district heating is there. And of course, an important parameter here is the heat demand and the heat density, or what we also call the linear heat density. And within the last maybe 10 years, there's been developed different tools in Europe and Denmark that are able to do this. And I'm sure this is also maybe already been developed in China or can be developed, where you have some IT tools where you can map the heat demand, and thereby you can identify the areas where there is a good potential for district heating, meaning that you have kind of urban areas where people live close to each other, and thereby you have a high linear heat density. And based on this, when you have this mapping, you can start to implement zoning policies. So where you identify the large potential for district heating, by zoning policies, you can then somehow decide that certain areas should develop district heating. And related to this, it is important that, or at least it has been important in Denmark, I think, that in the national legislation, it is stated in the Heat Supply Act that the overall aim of district heating has a societal purpose. So the overall aim is to improve environment, and to deliver the most efficient heat supply to the citizens. So I think this is an important basic building block for district heating policies, that it is kind of defined in the legislation what the overall purpose of this is. And also a lot of the other questions that later arises in district heating planning can then refer back to this basic definition, basic premise, you can say, that the overall aim is societal gains. District heating regulation, in a way, is not only something that relates to very local conditions. So it's not only about the single project, it also relates to the rest of the energy sector. It relates to the building regulation. And it's not only, now this figure shows the European example, but it's not only, for example, local municipal regulation, it also relates to national regulation, and in Danish case, also European regulation. So you both have different regulation levels kind of geographically, and it also relates to regulation across energy sectors. So it's just important to have this in mind, to have this perspective on the district heating planning. Now, there are some challenges for when you do district heating projects and the district heating policies, which relates to the district heating being a monopoly. And if you follow what I mentioned before, that you kind of have these zoning policies for specific areas, you may even just make this monopoly even stronger. So this is kind of a key societal challenge to address. But from a company perspective, you also have if you look at it from a company perspective or from an investor perspective, then the challenge is that these systems rely on huge capital cost. So there are very large investments in the beginning when you are building a grid, establishing the capacity. And this also comes with a risk, because basically you're dependent on that people will connect to your grid and stay there. So you have a large investment in the beginning of a project associated with also a high risk. And then if you see it from the societal perspective, then while you may want to protect these investor concerns or address them, then on the other hand, you also have consumer concerns and local societal concerns about how do you protect the consumers from this monopoly. That's one point. So how do you make sure that the monopoly power is not abused? And the other point is also, it is beneficial to have a sort of district heating company that's also are willing to collaborate with local authorities for the overall energy planning, because district heating becomes a very important infrastructure for the city energy system. And therefore, it is also important that the organization that runs the district heating system is also committed to and are willing to participate in overall city planning and energy planning. So in a way, you can say we have these two challenges, or these two concerns to balance. On the one hand, we have consumer acceptance, and on the other hand, you can say investor protection. So the investor needs to know his investment is viable, so he needs to have some certainty about the demand and the willingness of people to connect to the system. And on the other hand, you have the consumers who should not be, you could say, victims from this monopoly. So for example, in Europe, we have seen examples that the monopolies increase the prices too much because they have this monopoly power. And one way that this can be balanced, and that has happened in Denmark, is you place us in the regulation, place yourself in this top right corner, where you, on the one hand, you establish an obligation to connect within the district heating areas. So that means that the households in these areas should be connected to district heating. So by this, you then kind of protect the investor and make sure that the investment is viable, because it secures the demand. But by this, of course, you create this strong monopoly. So on the other hand, to balance this, it is important to have an effective and strong price control, and also, as I will address later, also some ownership structures that enables this control of the company. The other options, I think, are not likely to be very successful either, if you don't make sure that the people will connect. Investors are not willing to invest in the system, and on the other hand, if you have a too strong investor protection and don't have consumer protection, then consumers will not connect to the system. So I think kind of the recipe to be successful is this top right corner, the green circle. Then when you start to consider how should you then construct this regulation, I think it's important to remember that we have three forms of regulation. There has been a tendency in Europe and to focus only on the market power or the buying power of consumers, and on the other hand, the state regulative power. But the Danish experience show that also the third option, which is ownership power, has been an important element of the regulatory systems. So you can also empower consumers through ownership rights. So this is what this figure shows, that on the left you have the consumers, which should somehow be able to control a company which then returns a price to the consumers, and that can happen through ownership power, buying power, or state regulative power. So this figure then kind of outline, you can say, some basic options to do this. So on the one axis you have different forms of ownership, and on the other axis you have different basic forms of price, state regulatory price, price regulation. The dark blue circle here that I've marked kind of just it marks where the Danish regulation has been successful. And this has been a combination of what we call a true cost regulation, and then ownership forms where either the consumers owns the company themselves. That's the most common ownership form of the district heating. And then the other has been municipal ownership. So the local authority, the municipalities owns the company. We only have a few cases where we have had commercial private ownership, and that has not been very successful combined with the price regulation, because we have seen that these companies have abused the monopoly power. But an very important point from this figure is to remember to consider these two variables together. So when you consider your price regulation, you should always consider what kind of ownership structure you have. So whether your policies will be successful has shown to be dependent on the combination of ownership and price regulation. So when you consider price regulation, it cannot be done without also consider the ownership regulation. So I'll just briefly outline these different types of price regulation that has been applied in Denmark and in Europe. So one basic regulation, a form of price regulation, is what we call a price cap, and that is also sometimes related to benchmark models and other kinds. So the basic idea is that you allow a certain profit to the company, but this profit is somehow controlled by state regulative power. And the idea of this is to compromise or seek a compromise between investor demands for a return, and on the other hand, this need for protecting consumers. And the potential benefit of this is, of course, then by allowing a certain profit, you may be able to attract private capital. So in theory, it can be a good model, but what we sometimes have seen in practice is that it can be very hard for the state regulative power to control the prices, because it is the company who knows the true cost. And if the state regulator don't know the true cost, it is also very difficult to regulate what we call a fair price, or regulate the price cap. So this has shown to be can be a challenge, that you have different interests. The company wants high prices to give a high return, and the state want low prices to protect the consumers. So we have the kind of conflict of interest, and there it has sometimes been a problem that the companies have the information power, meaning that they have the knowledge about the true cost, and thereby make it difficult for the state to regulate the price cap. A variation of this is what we call the true cost regulation, which has been applied in Denmark, and that basically says that the companies are not allowed to make any profit. So the prices that the heat prices for the consumers can only reflect the cost of delivering the heat. So no profit is really allowed. And if you have any profit, it has to be paid back to the consumers by lowering the prices. The benefits of this price regulation is, of course, it can, when it works, it gives very low prices, and thereby the consumers are willing to say are very positive towards the system and are willing to accept it. And it also ensures that you always have enough capital in the company to develop the systems, invest in the system development. So the capital is not kind of moved out of the company and to elsewhere. But the challenges of this kind of regulations is the same as the one before, that it still relies on the company, that the company is willing to collaborate with the state regulative power. So it's willing to share its information about the true cost, because if the state regulative power does not have access to the real cost information, then it's also difficult to enforce the price regulation. So this kind of basic challenge that we see across different price regulation leads to the question of ownership. And the interesting part about ownership is that by changing ownership structures, you also change interest and incentives. So by different ownership forms, you can change kind of, or you can align the interest between different parties in the society. So this figure shows the classical example in a market economy, where you typically will have a company, the box in the middle, who have an interest in high prices always to make a profit. Then on the other hand, you have the consumers and the state who might want lower prices to benefit the older society. So in a normal market economy, you have this conflict of interest, but this is then controlled. The company is controlled partly by state regulation and also by the consumer's buying power. So that is that the consumers have a free choice. So if they think the price is too high, they can choose another option, and thereby they have some sort of buying power or market control over the company. The problem with district heating and now the monopoly situation is that this consumer buying power is disabled. because we have a monopoly situation, and that's why you cannot really, this principle doesn't really work. What has been done in many cases in Scandinavia is to have municipal-owned companies, and by having this, you kind of align the interest between consumers, authorities, and companies. So you have this indirect control between from consumers to company through the municipality, and thereby you have some sort of control of the company, the development in the company, and also the development in the prices. A more radical variation is the one we see often in Denmark, is that the consumers own the district heating company. So there you have a direct ownership control of the company by the consumers. So in the Danish case, the consumers elect a board, which then typically will appoint a management, which then runs the company. And by then, it means that you suddenly here have owners of the company who have the same interest as the state regulative power, and that is low prices. So that has shown in the Danish case to make the price regulation much more effective, because the companies and the owners have the same interest as the regulation have. So in that way, the interests are suddenly aligned, and that makes everything much easier. In the forthcoming guidebook, which Aalborg University and Arena will publish, they also provide examples from other countries of how to have different ownership structures and so on, not only from Denmark but also from other countries. This table just documents some experience from Denmark, which has shown that this ownership factor is very important. So you see some examples, for example, from if you see this company here, in the bottom, you can see that a change in ownership also changed the prices quite dramatically from one year to another. So all these companies were owned by, you can say, normal commercial private companies. And what characterized all these companies was that the prices was much higher than the other companies. And what we then saw was that when this ownership was changed, either to municipal ownership or to consumer ownership, we saw an immediate effect on prices and large efficiency gains. So this kind of indicate the same, as I said before, from a theoretical angle, that it is difficult to have a price regulation if you have a company that's not willing to collaborate, because they have the company have the information about the real information about the true cost of its operation. So in the Danish case, the authorities have very difficult. It's been difficult for the company for the regulatory power to control the prices if the company is not willing to collaborate. So in the end here, just to sum up the overall framework which enable district heating in the Danish case, then the first is that you need an overall national legislation that establishes the overall purpose of district heating, saying that the overall purpose is to provide societal gains by having a cost-efficient heat supply, by lowering pollution and lowering air pollution and so on, have environmental gains. And then when you establish the companies, you need to address ownership and price regulation to regulate the relation between consumers and company. And it's also important that this company structure is willing and is able to collaborate with local planning authorities to benefit a long-term urban planning and long-term also local energy planning. And then also as a fifth element, which I have not addressed so much here, is also you can have some state initiated mechanisms that provide easy access to capital. And historically, that has also played an important part in Denmark to have this sort of collective institution that can provide cheap and patient capital to the investment. So to sum up, you can say that the opportunity and the potential of district heating in these years are very high, and it's important that the district heating has a societal purpose, a societal aim, and when implementing it, what is important is to control the monopoly, to make sure that you have a company that's willing to collaborate, and yeah, that was the final slide from my side. Thank you.
好，Thank you, Mr. Soren。接下来呢，我们有请接下来我们有请2位女士做发言啊。2位女士是来自于能源协会第一位女士是 Mr. Violet，第2位女士是 Mr. Gerbic。Mr. Violet 女士一直是在气候变化、能效还有再生能源融资方面具有丰富的经验。她也是发起推动了能效协调的这个小组。这个小组也是这个能源协会国家以及这个欧盟成员国之间是这个信息和这个经验分享的重要平台。Mr. Gerbic 律师是位律师，他在这个能源领域还有国际环境方面拥有丰富的经验。在塞尔维亚的集中供热公司的法务部还有矿业和能源部也积累了丰富的工作经验。目前呢也在从事供热制冷网络的相关工作。所以接下来的15分钟的时间呢，有请2位女士为我们进行分享。她们分享的主要题目是如何应对集中供暖系统中的法规、金融以及所有权的挑战。首先我们欢迎 Mr. Violet 女士。
Thank you very much for inviting us, and actually we are very thrilled for being here today because both Biljana and I have the first time experience talking to another continent, and because I was so nervous, now I lost my screen. Biljana, can you share the screen for me as well? I'm sorry for that, but we'll try to bring a kind of a different dimension to these discussions because we are managing and involved, thank you, Biljana, in the energy community. And for those of you who don't know the energy community, I'll just bring the top view on that, and then Biljana will go into more details on how the district heating in energy community functions, or maybe sometimes doesn't function. So on the agenda today, we have a few slides about the energy community, and then about the heating and cooling acquis in the energy community and the EU, some more details on district heating in the energy community, and also some means for integrated renewables and waste heat. And I will bring just a few words about the community itself. And for those of you, probably the large majority who never heard of it, this is a treaty-based I wouldn't call it an organization because it's basically an integration tool. So in 2005, the EU, with a number of countries from Southeast Europe, signed a treaty called the Energy Community Treaty. And that treaty has, at that time, one kind of single purpose, and that was to help these countries, which are EU neighborhood countries, to integrate faster in the EU through the energy sector. So therefore, the main purpose was to bring in the energy-related acquis from the EU to these countries, and I'll name the countries very soon, which are not yet member states, but they should behave as if they were. So these countries are, I don't think you see the legend, but the yellow, light yellow color, these are the countries that are contracting parties. So they signed the treaty. And these are the Western Balkans countries, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. And some Eastern Partnership countries joined later, and these are Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. So you have one batch of countries, non-EU, who signed the treaty with the EU at large. So all the other side of the equation is all the EU member states represented only by the Commission in one voice. And we also have some interesting observers, and these are Norway, imagine, Turkey, and Armenia. So we have a very interesting configuration, from the very diverse configuration, but the treaty itself unifies its interest through treaty obligations, and they are binding by those who signed, so the contracting parties and the EU member states. And the treaty, as I said, looks at the market integrations of the energy market integrations, but also looks at how these countries can improve their environmental situation. And here comes in place the energy supply and the energy consumption, and with more and more emphasis on renewable use and also energy efficiency. So you have now a bit of a higher picture. Next, please, Viviana. And as I said, the treaty operates based on the EU acquis. And when it comes to heating and cooling, the EU acquis, which is currently in place in the EU and the energy community, integrates energy efficiency directive, the renewable energy directive, in the EU, the governance regulation from the clean energy package, and also big picture strategy on energy system integration. What I wanted to say is that sometimes there is a time lag between the acquis in force in the EU and the adoption of the acquis in the energy community, but not more than maybe 2 years. So in the EU now, you have an amended energy efficiency directive, which a clear target of energy efficiency by 2030. In the energy community, we are still yet to adopt that, but nevertheless, we operate on the, still under the 2020 target, if you want. And for that, I think it's important to remember the district heating and the heating and cooling obligation under that. And I'll speak about it a bit more in details in the next slide. But for now, let's stay on the big picture or the bigger picture. So in the EU now, there is an obligation to have a target set for the EU at large of greenhouse gas emissions, which is now has been upgraded from 40% by 2030 to 55% by 2030 by the Parliament of the EU. So now the EU has stepped up on the ambition to meet a 52% reduction in 2030 of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990. And for that, there are three major pieces of legislation that contributes to this. One is the Energy Efficiency Directive, as I said. The other one is the Renewables Directive. It's called Renewables Directive 2 because it has been recast, reshaped from the old directive that was adopted back in 2009. So this is very recent. It's 2018 under the Clean Energy Package. And this comes with, again, for now, and I'm saying for now because this is also being looked into, for now it has an obligation of 32% renewable share in the total energy picture. But there is also a target set for renewables-based district heating in this particular directive, and that is 1.3% per year increase. And that tells you a lot about the emphasis that this acquis puts on renewables and waste heat in the heating system, in the district heating system. And then it also talks about the third-party access. And then there is, on top of this, there is a governance regulation, which actually covers, it's an umbrella regulation, because it's mostly mainstreaming the reporting on both energy efficiency and renewables. But also the regulation itself introduces this national energy and climate plans. This is already an integrative piece of management implementation acquis. And this is where district heating measures should be again included. So there is a very clear structure, almost regulated structure of this national energy and climate plan. So you have to put in, when you design your plans, you have to put in district heating measures based on renewables and waste heat. And on top of it, there is a strategy on energy system integration where waste heat adopted in 2020 by the EU, waste heat should be reused basically in district heating systems. Next, please. Now I think Soren already brought in some of the obligation from the Energy Efficiency Directive when it regards heating and cooling. And this is interesting because as any directive, it has to be transposed in national legislation. So the directive prescribes the big picture, but each country should transpose it, taking into account the national context. Nevertheless, the directive itself requires that each country prepares a comprehensive assessment of the potential for the application of high efficiency cogeneration, high efficiency, I'm stressing that, and efficient district heating and cooling. Now, there are annexes which define the high efficiency indicators, and also district heating and cooling is described as integrated renewables and waste in the system itself. So it also looks at the supply and transportation, if you want. It also requires a directive that countries will adopt policies to encourage the due taking into account at local and national level, or regional level as well, the potential. So you remember that Soren said you have to do this mapping where you have more potential, and where you have this potential, whenever you have a new development, either a new residential development or industrial development, you have to actually make a cost-benefit analysis whether you could supply heat and heating and cooling through either a cogeneration plant or through an efficient heating and cooling system. So it's really from the top level down to the local and regional level, where there are many implications from the legal viewpoint. Therefore, all this acquis tries to not only regulate very specific technologies or policies, but also looks at the potential, so encourages more use of the potential through local developments. And also, again, the infrastructure is also encouraged to be developed in the way that it accommodates third-party access, and also this connection through the existing maybe infrastructure through more waste heat sources and high efficiency cogeneration. Therefore, there is a very strong message these days on how efficiency and renewables should be combined in heating and cooling, especially through centralized systems like district heating. Now I hand over to Biljana because she will take you through more detailed examples in the energy community per se. Thank you.
Thank you, Violetta. Good morning to everyone, or good afternoon for the colleagues from China. So my name is Biljana Grbić and I'm a lawyer. Together with Violetta, we are working on development of heating and cooling network and district heating matters in the energy community. My part of presentation will focus on district heating systems in the energy community, and then I will tell you what are the means of integrating renewables and waste heat in the district heating. As you can see here, 9 contracting parties of energy community, 6 of them have actually developed district heating system, which are Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Moldova, North Macedonia, Serbia, and Ukraine. You see that Ukraine has a big district heating system with 1,400 district heating companies. So very large district heating, significant sector. And as of 2015, Ukraine district heating sector has undergone with major reforms. Concerning the regulatory authorities who are in charge to monitor and to regulate district heating, basically 4 contracting parties give this task to national regulatory authorities. 2 of them, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia, provide this task to local authorities. And even though this is not obligation under the EU framework, national regulatory authorities are controlling and monitoring district heating in most of member states, and as we see in most of contracting parties. The recommendation is to stay like this because local authorities do not have this independency and do not have necessary knowledge and expertise to effectively control district heating. Therefore, if local authorities remain in charge to monitor district heating, effective control of heat pricing or customer protection might be not ensured. And concerning the ownership, in district heating in our contracting parties, mainly district heating companies are owned by municipalities, and there are rare cases where private capital entered in the district heating. I will just mention example of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where in some recent years they are developed biomass-based district heating companies in the form of public-private partnership. And some of the common characteristics of district heating systems in the energy community is that the district heating is a service that is regarded as a service of public interest, and that it is provided by vertically integrated undertakings, meaning that production, distribution, and supply is merged in one company. The exception is North Macedonia, where there is obligation to separate these activities in different companies. And basically, we can say that there is no competition in the district heating, in the energy community contracting parties. What is also one of the common characteristics, which is maybe probably the biggest problem for the development and investments in district heating, is that tariffs are regulated and they do not reflect the true costs of production or of these activities. What I would say here that also energy community contracting parties do not have pricing of CO2 emissions. This is expected to come in the our contracting parties in this or the next year, in the upcoming period, and this will have to bring much higher prices actually. And now I'm moving to these means how to integrate renewables in waste heating district heating companies. Basically, either district heating companies developed by themselves or third parties independently produce heat from renewable sources and have right to inject this heat into the distribution network. And this is so-called third-party access. Renewable directive that Violetta mentioned provides provisions, some of the provisions, and this is for the first time. For the first time, this monopoly structure district heating is tackled by the European Union. And this provision, it is expected to be strengthened because this renewable directive is currently under revision. And in June this year, it is expected to have some stronger provisions on third-party access. First mean, development of the projects by district heating companies. As I said, district heating operators lack the fund for investment. And the reasons are because tariffs are regulated, they do not reflect true costs. Consumers in our contracting parties are usually dissatisfied. There is a low payment disciplines, and there are a huge number of disconnections of individual apartments. And then the only mean to finance these projects is to take loans or some grants or to borrow money from the state. Challenges which are related to financing is numerous. First, there is a need to develop some pre-feasibility studies, some assessments, some planning, and this is here the problem is the lack of human capacity usually at the local level. If you don't have national strategy, national planning, then local authorities are usually not capable to deal with this. And then concerning the financing, if it's borrowed by the state, state aid rules need to be respected, or if it's borrowed by international financing institutions or donors, then a certain percent of co-financing or some public guarantees need to be provided. In the right angle down, I provided the link with a database of donors programs which provide financing in the energy community contracting parties, and who is interested to see what are the programs, what are the opportunities, you can go right click and open hyperlink so to see more about donors programs. And now in the next two slides, I will just shortly tell you about some geothermal projects and solar thermal projects in the energy community. I would say that our contracting parties are rich in geothermal sources. I'm coming from Serbia, so I will tell you that Serbia is a part of this Pannonian basin, and definitely, especially north part, and definitely rich in geothermal sources. And there is one project developed 2 years ago, which started with the heating of 8 public buildings with a project capacity of 262 megawatts. It was funded by the European Union Instrument for Pre-Accession Fund, and the water temperature here is 75 degrees, and it is expected that this project will develop now for also households and residential buildings, not only for public buildings. We have good cooperation with EBRD, and EBRD has its separate program for renewable district heating, district energy for Western Balkan, and there are numerous of projects in pipeline that should develop geothermal and also solar thermal projects. And this is one of the solar thermal projects. It is in my hometown city of Pančevo. This reheating company developed with the support of USAID and again with the European Union instrument for pre-accession two solar thermal plants, one in the ground and second and at the rooftop. It is used for the heating of sanitary hot water. Here is also the hyperlink if you want to see more information about these projects. And now this second mean of introducing renewable heat and waste heat in district heating, third-party access, where third parties produce renewable and have right to inject in the district heating network. Since in our contracting parties, there are no practical examples of this, I will just shortly tell you about some theoretical models. Single buyer model, well, district heating purchases heat, renewable heat from third party, and it remains the only supplier to consumers. And network access model where district heating company does not purchase this heat, but third party is at the same time the supplier. This second model, as I am aware, there is no practical examples either in member states, European Union member states, but not also in contracting parties. Regarding do district heating companies have to provide this access? Third-party access can be voluntary or mandatory, and depending on whether the predefined rules exist in the regulation of one country, third-party access can be regulated or can be negotiated. So district heating company have freedom to negotiate with third party on terms and conditions of access. And yes, there are also regulatory and financing challenges related to third party access. District heating company need to define technical terms, requirements for access, which should be done in the network code, then cost of the network connection and development of the infrastructure, network charge for the use of the network. Then there is network losses, how they should be allocated, and also procuring the renewable heat. For example, in Lithuania, renewable heat is procured by the district heating company at the monthly basis by organizing auctions. So one of the means to procure renewable heat is organizing an auctions, or there is direct negotiation, in which case district heating company need to negotiate these contractual terms, and this is also not easy to both sides to agree on the duration of contract and some other clause that are very important actually for this business relation. And concerning third-party access in the energy community, I can say that all contracting parties have allowed third-party access, which is good and which is important. And some of them have enabling provisions in terms that Moldova legislation give priority of access to renewable and waste heat, and Ukraine law on heat supply says that tender need to be organized if two or more producers are connected to the distribution network. However, none of our contracting parties really organize some auctions for renewables heat, or there is some support scheme at the national level or local level for heat to be produced from renewable and waste heat. And yes, some of the conclusions is that integration of renewable heat and waste heating district heating company is in the early phase. So in the upcoming period, we are expecting to work a lot on defining some national policy, but also to support local authorities. As Violetta said, before everything we need to do comprehensive assessment and to see where is potential for district heating and to see where is potential where we can build this infrastructure. We support the solution that independent bodies, independent institutions who are equipped with necessary knowledge actually regulate and monitor district heating rather than local authorities. And also, as I said, human capacity is usually lacking, so some technical assistance is needed for local and national authorities to define this enabling framework, to define support scheme, and also to organize maybe some auctions for renewable heat and waste heat. Thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't take too much time. I will stop.
OK, thank you。谢谢两位女士的精彩的、全面的发言。我们这个环节的最后一位嘉宾是来自于中国建筑设计研究院的总工程师潘云刚先生。潘总是长期从事建筑、暖通空调设计和可再生能源、建筑的应用实践方面具有非常丰富的经验，在我们国内也是属于非常知名的专家。我们中国的很多这个科技攻关项目的课题啊，潘总也是这个课题的主要的负责人，所以我们接下来有请潘总为我们分享一下拉萨火车站供暖系统对太阳能利用方面的相关研究。好，有请潘总。
各位大家上午好，下午好啊！非常高兴能够参加今天这个会议。下面我把我的 PPT 给共享一下。请问能够看到我的 PPT 吗？能够看到吗？
可以，还没有看到。
可以看见潘总。
正在控制啊。
还没看见啊？
可以。
OK， 好嘞。好，因为前面的很多专家
还不是全屏，还不是全屏。好，这样好了。
OK， 前面很多专家从金融、经济、法规、技术、政策等各个方面做了很多报告，我自己觉得收获很大，尤其宏观层面的。那么我呢是在设计院，所以呢是对具体工程更多一些，所以今天非常高兴能够参加这个会。我今天给大家介绍的是拉萨火车站采暖系统对太阳能的利用。这个拉萨火车站呢是总建筑面积19500平方米，是在2006年7月份正式投入使用的。这个建筑一共是2层，大概总高度21米，地下有1层。这个是建筑的热工，建筑的外维护结构的热工情况。下面呢，我们有一个设计目标，是刚开始做设计的时候一个目标，我们希望太阳能对供暖系统的贡献率全年能达到50%。第二部分呢，我给大家介绍一下我们现在房间的一些设计参数和设计负荷。这个是房间的参数，大家可以看到我们的计算温度呢，都比现在的规范要求的都来得低一些。这个为什么低的原因呢？是因为拉萨非常干燥，如果比如说我们也做到20度以后啊，当地人员会反应特别燥热，所以我们就相对做的低了，这是一个原因。第二个原因是因为我们准备采用的是地板辐射供暖方式，这样人体的 operating temperature 操作温度啊必然是高于室温，人体的感应会比室温高，这样也是一个节约能源的一个方式。那么下面是我们做的热负荷计算的结果，是在典型设计日逐时计算的，从0点计算到24点。那么大家可以看到是最高是884千瓦这个楼的热负荷。第3部分介绍室内的采暖系统设计。因为我们是准备做地板辐射， 为什么要准备做地板辐射呢？是因为我们也觉得地板辐射一个是低温水，同时呢，我们太阳能呢供应的热水也是低位的热源，这两者是正好符合我们的需求，就是供应侧和需求侧是比较一致的。那么最后我们设计采用的供暖的热水温度是41度供水，36度回水，这个是通过每个房间的计算结果得到的。为什么要用太阳能？其实我就不用多说了，因为拉萨是一个非常好的太阳能应用的地区，尤其它的冬季的太阳总辐射强度每天能达到21740千焦每平方米，所以这个是非常值得我们去利用的。这个在研究过程中呢，也考虑了我们太阳能用什么样的集热器的问题。在当时呢，有两大类集热器，一个是平板型，一个是真空型。我说的是非聚光的集热器，还有一个潮式集热器是聚光型的。因为聚光型用起来有一些难度，所以我们还是考虑的是非聚光。我们对两个都做了一个详细的比较，最后设计是用了真空管型的集热器。那么集热器的布置和安装角度，它的集热量和安装角度怎么优化，还有和我们这个楼的高度都是有关的。我们整个的热水集热系统是一个开式系统，所谓开式的就是它是和大气是相通的这样一个系统。我们设计要求集热器的水温是40度进水、50度出水的集热器。当时在设计是没有要求做真空管，是后来投标过程中最后采用了真空管集热器，因为真空管的效率更高一些。这一张图是一个耦合图，是太阳能的发热量这个曲线中间的曲线和我们的绿色那根曲线是我们用典型设计日我们需要的热量，在各个时间段需要的热量。那么这个左下角这个图呢是太阳能集热器的效率图。从这两张图可以看出来，我们白天的时候太阳能的集热量是多于我们逐时需要的，所以这部分是可以储存下来到夜间使用。在储存的时候也考虑了两个蓄热方法，一个是用土壤来蓄热，一个是用水蓄热。那么我们经过研究，水蓄热投资少，占地面积也比较小。蓄热水池的容量现在是1500立方米的蓄热水池。下面给大家介绍一下太阳能集热系统和太阳能供热系统。在这个里边呢，我想首先要强调，我们做太阳能并不是完全100%利用太阳能，因为它有阴天的时间，所以我们也设置了辅助热源。辅助热源是按照建筑的供暖负荷、基本供暖负荷的需求来设置的。这是一个整个太阳能供暖系统、太阳能与建筑供暖系统的全部图。全部图这个最大的一个面积的是我们的太阳能热水的集热系统。集热系统通过把热水集热以后，白天的集热以后收集到我们的蓄热系统里边去，这是蓄热系统。第三个是取热系统，通过从蓄热水箱取出热量，向建筑内供暖。如果当太阳能不够的时候，就是说不能满足需求的时候，我们就通过设置辅助热源系统，这是从外面来的一个辅助热源，来补充房间需要的热量，这样能够达到房间的需求和我们最大利用太阳能的一个目的。在这个项目完成以后，就是已经建成以后，我们就在冬天专门去拉萨做了现场的测试，是12月9号到16号这期间，2006年12月9号到16号。这是我们测试团队，这是我们当时测试团队安装仪器的情况。那么在现场我们也可以看到，这个有一个太阳能集热器真空管坏了，所以这是现场我们发现的，它就漏水了，这是一个很严重的问题，但是就让它尽快修复了。实测呢做了一些问卷的调查，就是让人的主观感受的调查，这里边有满意的，有不满意的情况，大家可以看看，我不详细介绍了，时间问题。总体来说是一个基本满意，是这样一种状态。 那么现场问卷调查不满意的原因是认为那个有个别的区域温度比较低，是这个原因引起的不满意。然后呢，我们也做了实际的测量，我们用了自动温度计量仪，记录仪，对每一个地方做了实际的，对5个房间，包括候车厅、包括贵宾室、母婴候车室和站长的办公室，做了逐实的实际测量。这个是实际测量出来的实际温度的情况。当天是12月，我们拿12月12号的数据来看，12月12号的数据啊，是天气是阴天的情况，后来下午还下雪了。那么我们看到温度还是比较合理的，还是比较能够满足我们原来的设计温度。这个是实测的是太阳能热水整个热水系统，包括供热系统，包括太阳能热水系统、集热系统和蓄热系统的情况。可以看到这些所有的温度在逐时的温度，从10点一直到下午，一直到晚上到太阳那个有太阳和没太阳的时候的情况，整个测试做了一个测试。那么测试了以后，最后我们做了一个简单的总结，就是设计和实测数据比较，我们发现那个总的来说，房间温度都能达到，甚至有的超过了设计室温的要求。第二个呢，候车室有个别出现了不满足的情况，候车室有个别出现了温度低于设计温度的情况。这个候车室低于设计温度的原因，我们也做了分析，主要是有很多房间呢，那个候车室跟那个进出站大厅，它的门永远是开着的，它永远是开着门，冷空气大量的进入房间，导致它的温度过低。另外一个原因呢，是我们有个别的地板辐射、地暖管铺设的不好，就是在施工过程中损坏了，所以你会看到同样一个房间有最高的那个地面温度最高值是25到26度，最低的一个地方地面温度只有8到9度，就地面温度8到9度实际上是散不出热来了。这是我们发现的一些测试过程中发现的问题。那么我们也给他们提出了一些改正问题的一些建议。后来几年了解了，他们做了一些改进，有些问题能改进的，比如说我们加自动门来改进，防止冷风渗透这样一个方式来改进它。总结整个初步结论是发现是可以看到，因为这个把这温度测出来，我们可以在12月12号当天太阳能集热器的平均热效率是44%，因为我们实测的时候，我们还测量了天空的太阳辐射情况。大家看右下角这个图呢，就是最初那个线就是太阳辐照度，然后第二根线呢就是虚的那个粗线呢，就是太阳能的集热量。那么下面2根线呢，分别是我们取的热量和供应到建筑里边的热量，取得热量和供应到建筑里的热量实际上是不完全相等的，这里边有测试的误差问题，也有实际出现的一些那个差值。所以总结初步的结论是我们认为那个是能够达到这个使用要求的，因为我们当时了解它是从2006年11月中旬的时候才开始应用那个集热系统，才开始投入运行。在天气良好的时候，集热系统水温达到55度以上，我们实际上只要求50度。所以如果进行适当的跨季节蓄热，比如说从10月份就开始运行集热系统，我们可以存续更多的热水。所以总体来说，按照拉萨的冬季日照率77%来计算的话，我们整个太阳能在整个冬季对采暖系统的建筑采暖系统的贡献率能达到60%到70%左右。这个呢，也应该说完成了我们事先想设定的目标50%的目标。总体来说，我们认为太阳能是个取之不尽、用之不绝的，也是对社会没有任何污染的一个清洁能源，是值得我们去大力推荐的。好了，我今天的发言到这里，谢谢各位。
好，感谢潘总哈。 也感谢这个环节四位这个嘉宾的精彩发言哈。然后按照这个日程呢，接下来有一个提问的环节哈。我呢先抛砖引玉的提几个问题哈。刚才也是听了几位嘉宾的介绍。首先呢，我想问一下这个女士吧，Gerbeck 女士 ，Miss Gerbeck。可能发音不准这样的名字。然后我刚才从你那个 PPT 里面啊，我看到就是您讲了欧洲的很多国家的这个 district heating system， 它都是public 或者是 public 跟 private 共有的这种模式。就是我想了解，就是说在欧洲的这些国家里面，在私有化，就是除了政府的这个公共部门之外，在私有化方面。有没有相关的这种导向性的一些政策或者激励的措施？Hello，
Diana, you have to unmute yourself. Liliana, unmute.
Yes, I'm here. Could you please repeat the question?
OK，sorry，就是在他刚才的这个在前面介绍的 PPT 里面，我看到在欧洲的很多国家，举了很多例子，就是不同的国家，有多少这个集中供热系统的数量，然后它的所有权有 public， 还有 private， 所以我想了解，就是我看了从这个这页 PPT 来看，总的来说是 public 为主的这种模式。我想了解有没有就是在 private 为主的这种模式，或者说政府在推动 private 的这种模式方面有没有相关的导向性的政策和建议措施？
If I could respond this question afterwards, I didn't understand it quite well, or if you could write it in the chat so I can provide you with the right answer.
I can try.
Please, Violeta.
Yes, it's actually I'm coming from Romania, and Romania has had a large district heating system in the past. Now, as Biljana said in her presentation, most of these companies, all of these companies, are initially municipal companies. What Romania has done in the early days, so 1992, 3, 4, they didn't privatize per se, but they kind of leased their smaller district heating companies to private operators. Now, in some cases, it worked fairly well. In other cases, it didn't work well at all. Now, I think Soren also pointed out that sometimes the private interest is more or less contrary to the consumer's interest / the regulator's interest. So it's all about being able to invest in the network, maintaining and development, and B, being able to keep the tariffs in a sort of area where both the company and the consumers have reached their sort of interest / potential. So in the case of Romania, at least this is a case I know best from the EU member states, privatizing or even giving a concession, a long-term concession, was not necessarily a very successful exercise, but on the other hand, also keeping it into the public ownership, like municipal ownership, in the absence of very good regulatory framework was not successful either, because, for example, Bucharest, which is capital of Romania, with the largest district heating system, now the company that owned and operated the system is bankrupt. So now you have huge problems in delivering heat, and in the absence of zoning, many apartments in multi-apartment buildings choose to disconnect and resort to individual gas-fired boilers, and that put the company into a very unfortunate financial situation. So I don't believe that in this particular infrastructure and setup, privatization will be the most successful example, unless you have a very strong regulatory authority or a very strong municipal oversight. In the case of the Western Balkans, where we are more familiar, few new companies appeared based on biomass heating, and they are supplying heat, but in general to a small number, mostly public buildings. So you have private investors, but not necessarily large-scale distribution systems involved. I think that's more or less what I think we could be able to share with you from the limited experience that we have seen in the countries that we monitor, which are non-EU member states. Thank you.
I would just add that in case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, private investors developed new technology, new production that is based on biomass, and they used already built infrastructure. So they didn't have this financing challenges regarding new development of new infrastructure.
Okay. Thank you for your excellent answer. 各位，因为这个时间的关系啊，我就没有再向其他的嘉宾提问了。我想下来之后呢，如果我们今天参会的这个各位嘉宾各位代表，如果有相关的问题，可以以书面的方式，或者是通过邮件，给我们这个嘉宾留言，然后我们和我们水电水利规划设计总院和里面呢同志也会继续跟你们做好服务啊。那按照这个日程的这个安排的话，是中间有一个休息，然后完了之后是下一个环节。但是因为目前我们的这个时间呢已经接近到了下一个环节，所以我们就直接进入下一个环节。那么下一个环节呢，我们是讨论这个供热制冷从传统模式向高效清洁可再生模式转变。我想刚才这个环节呢，大家听了很多关于政策、金融，包括市场化等等方面，大家听了很多这方面的介绍。接下来呢，我想我们更多的是从技术层面，我们谈一谈我们在这个集中供热或制冷方面，我们面临的一些技术的困难挑战，需要如何做些应对。这个环节呢，我们也是邀请了3位嘉宾。第一位嘉宾呢是来自于奥尔本大学能源规划与系统建模的这个教授Jacker，Mr. Jacker 先生一直是致力于这个不同地理范围内完整能源系统的建模和分析的这个相关工作。他是在这个奥尔本大学是智能城市能源系统背景的博士，也是评估智能 能源系统影响的能源系统分析工具，叫Energy Plan 的核心开发者之一。所以接下来的这个30分钟的时间呢，我们有请 Mr. Becker 给我们做精彩的分享。Welcome. Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. I was just unclear if I should start now, but thank you for the invitation for doing this presentation on technical challenges and solutions for the integration of low-grade heat sources into existing network and buildings. I will just share my screen so you all can follow, and I hope you see it. And now let me know if there's any issue. But else, yes, I'm an associate professor at Aalborg University in Denmark, where I work with energy systems analysis, and including in that, I also work on district heating. So that will be my presentation, is talking about what do we need to do to integrate low-grade heat sources and renewable energy into our district heating system. So first of all, some of the key things that we need to include is I want to emphasize is not only that we talk about district heating from a heating system perspective, but also from the focus of the building. So we always need to keep in mind that we have to supply these systems for the building. So we have some efficiencies we can get through building operation and maintenance. We have something through the whole energy system and the energy supply we perform. So can we supply renewable energy into our district heating grids, and we can insulate and improve our building performance. So we need to make sure that all these three things play together when we talk about future heating systems for countries and for cities. So we had a report on future green buildings that might be interesting in this as well. But the whole basic concept for talking about a transition and why district heating is important in this renewable energy transition is that we talk a lot about the concept of smart energy systems. And smart energy systems are systems where we are not only focusing on the electricity grid, but instead that we keep in mind that all these grids can play together. So by having renewable energy, wind turbines, solar panels, generating electricity, but being able to convert that into, for instance, heating through a heat pump will allow us to utilize very cheap thermal storage instead of utilizing very expensive electricity storage. So all these different system interactions we can combine and reach a more efficient system. But to do this and to utilize large-scale heat storage, for instance, we need to make sure that we have such a system with district heating in it. So district heating can play a key role in not only for supplying heat, but also for transitioning to more renewable energy in our energy system. So overall, my agenda is I'll talk a little about some current status on district heating and the generations of this, and then I'll move on into talking about low temperature district heating and what technical aspects there is and why it's a good idea to go towards low energy. And then how this, as an example, and this is for a case in Denmark, of course, but can be actually, I would say, applied everywhere in the world, at least some of the key concepts in it, which can be very beneficial. But basically, this is, I know for Europe, but there's a lot of district heating in many countries, but there's also many countries who doesn't have. It also goes for, you can say in China, you also have a lot of district heating in certain areas, and then in some, due to climate or other things, there's not so much or nothing of district heating. And there are different consequences in terms of when your heating season is, and whether your heating is also supplied for domestic hot water, or you have to make that on your own. So all these things play together, where we need to make sure that first of all, there's a challenge not only to develop district heating, but in some countries there's a challenge to also build out with completely new district heating areas. And this could maybe also be the case in Asia, that we can for some areas will have to expand with district heating. We have done some analysis on this for Europe, but you could also again do in principle the same, looking at the geographical aspects, and then this is also kind of the framework for what have happened in China, where there's some areas where it makes a lot of sense climate-wise, and there's areas where maybe it's not ideal. But what our studies show for Europe is it actually works also in warmer climates, because there is still a heating season sometimes a year, or you can potentially also work with having district cooling and district heating playing together. But I just wanted to show this example here for how we've done it in Europe, and here we have actually estimated a bunch of different baselines in this heater roadmap Europe and potentials for district heating. And this also includes countries like Spain. So it's this one where we actually can see that there is a potential for more district heating in it. That is the green one, so we can actually go all the way up to 50%. And this is especially also because industry can be connected to this. So there's a potential for utilizing district heating with industry as well. So there are some options also in countries with warmer climate. Yeah, so the second thing the important thing is, first of all, to look at where can we actually build it out, or what development has to happen. Can we have more district heating? So that's the first step. The second step becomes looking at what kind of generation, what is our district heating situation in the given system we're looking at. And this is an example of so we've defined in our research project 4th generation district heating, 4 generations of district heating. Or Sven Werner, among others, have been involved in this, Professor Sven Werner. And what we have identified is we have the first generation, which was built way before in the 1930s, but these are steam-based systems. These are still present in the world, some places around. So that's the first generation of district heating. They have high temperature steam running around the system, and this also generate a high amount of losses. And we want to eliminate losses as much as we can. They still have some merit, you can say, today, besides that they're built and they can be used. Then it's also that there is a demand potentially in some areas for high temperature steam, so in industrial processes. So this could maybe still be relevant in some areas. Then the second generation, which was built in around the 1930s to the 1980s, and these are also again still operating many places in the world, but these are where we now have high pressure. We have pressurized water, so we have water running around with over 100 degrees in our system. But again, we're talking about high temperatures. You also have to pressurize the water. So again, we have some efficiency losses in such a second generation system. In many Eastern European or Russia, this is a common has been a common solution for how to handle district heating. And then what we call third generation district heating, and this is when we start getting the temperature below 100 degrees, so below boiling point. So now we can have low pressure water systems that can deliver these district heating supplies to the system. And then a lot of Scandinavian countries utilizes this. This is a picture from Denmark with a small CHP plant. But else, the whole idea here is that we're now having medium temperature water systems. And this is the current state in most countries, are these first, second, and third generation. That's almost every district heating system in the world can be categorized based on this. But what we need to do, for some, it might be moving to third generation, but overall for everyone, I would say what we need to do is to move towards fourth generation district heating. And by going to fourth generation district heating, we are lowering supply and return temperature. That's some of the key things. And we're increasing the energy efficiency. So we need to lower supply, lower return temperature. We will, by doing that, gain a multiple amount of benefits. We will first of all gain the benefits of having less loss in our system. So we will reduce our losses. Second of all, we get a number of new supply technologies we can potentially use in our system. So when we look at the first two generations, the only option was really to have thermal plants, boilers, power plants, combined heat and power plants, delivering heat into our system because we needed to deliver it at such a high temperature. By reducing the temperature, now we got the option in a third generation system to have surplus heating from industry. We had maybe CSP from biomass, and we have solar heating. So we opened up by lowering the temperature. And now, if we can lower it even more, we can utilize heat pumps, we can utilize geothermal heat, we can utilize excess heat from supermarkets or from low-grade industry, from data centers. So there's a lot of options suddenly that we can combine this with. And this can make sense when we talk about renewable energy systems, and we need to start having more resources into our systems. This can be very beneficial. Of course, to do this, we need to upgrade our heating system. So that's why I started out with saying some of this, when we go towards renewable energy systems, it's not only, in some areas, it's about developing heating systems, but in many countries, it's about upgrading your heating system. So maintaining, when you upgrade your district heating system and pipes, we need to make sure we have it at the right standard, so we can actually utilize these kind of heats, excess heat, because they can help us integrate renewables and low-grade heat sources in our system. So to summarize, we need to utilize more of the energy. We can do that by having this low temperature district heating, and we can enable the use of low temperature renewable sources. And you can read more about this on our website for the project on fourth generation district heating, 40h.dk. But overall, we tried in that project to implement not only the institutional framework, but also looking at the grid technologies, at the waste heat available, and analyze actually what would be the benefits for the system of doing this. So what we need to do to transition to low temperature district heating? Well, first of all, we need to properly design our networks and our consumer connections. We need to have the right compatibility with the building stock. And what this means is we need to make sure that now, as a district heating operator, we can supply the heat at a low temperature, but we also need to make sure we can have the buildings that this low temperature is good enough. So we need to make sure that while doing this, we are also improving our building standard. If we have an existing district heating system, then maybe we need to adapt some installations. We need to maybe retrofit buildings. If you are in new areas or you're building out a new district heating in some areas, then we need to, again, we don't necessarily need to make sure that the buildings are retrofitted, but we need to make sure that the buildings are of a standard where this low temperature district heating makes sense. It is possible to build low temperature district heating in an existing household. We can see that from studies in Denmark. The issue is that, of course, this will require higher water flow, because we need to get the same amount of energy out there. We need to be able to send the energy with more water, and this of course has to be taken into account whether your current system can handle this. In small areas, this is not a problem, but maybe if it's the whole system suddenly going to this, there can be some issues. So some of the things we look at when we look at compatibility with the existing building stock is we need space heating. So when we have our space heating, we might need to insulate our buildings more. We might need to make sure that our radiators or our heat supply equipment in the buildings has to be the right scale. They might not be the heat exchanger might not be right at the current moment. But these are some besides this, the insulation might be a hard part. You can say there's a lot of work that can go into that. But in terms of the equipment changes and equipment upgrades, these are normally, I would say, not a huge issue in this sense. We can introduce different things like thermostatic valves to both control comfort levels, but also can help control the water flow depending on how people are using the houses and the buildings. One of the issues when you talk about domestic hot water, and if we want to use the district heating also for supplying water for cooking and for showering, then the water tank, we need certain heat exchangers to make sure there's no Legionella bacteria in the water tank. So for hygiene, there's some stuff you also need to take into account here. When we look at the existing heating network and compatibility, how do we need to make sure that we have an existing heating system? What can we do to bring the temperature down? Well, we can have lower temperature. Well, that means we have higher flow rates, and as I said, this means that we need to lower the supply temperature and the return temperature as well to make sure we make this as feasible as possible. But we might need some new pipes or might need to upgrade the pipes. But in general, if we can lower both, we can maybe maintain the same pipes. If we have this, give us a bunch of new options in terms of excess heat sources. So it might be that we actually need to build some new pipes just to activate those heat sources into our system. So if we have a supermarket somewhere and we have to get it into our system, we might need to build a pipe to that shopping mall. We might have to have more boilers or heat pumps along the grid so we can boost temperature of the water if the supply temperature becomes too low. Maybe because it's cold or because it's too far away. So when we look at it, heat pumps becomes a central technology in this as a renewable source. We can couple it to the district heating and cooling system, potentially both support heating and cooling. It can help in boosting temperatures, and it can, especially for getting in renewable energy, the whole key is we can use electricity to conduct heating in our system. So heat pumps, when we talk about as a renewable source, is a you can say an intermediate step. Else, when we talk about renewables in our grid, we talk about technology as geothermal, where we can find hot sources in the underground that we can include into our heating system, either directly if we're lucky and the temperature close to the surface is high enough, or like in many other project examples right now that they're using heat pumps. So at the geothermal source will be, you can say, the medium for boosting temperature up, as will happen in a heat pump. Another option for renewable that's very obvious is also to using the sun. So instead of using solar PV to create electricity, we also can introduce solar thermal. So we have solar panels that capture the heat from the sun and use that to heating our heating system. And this is also relevant in countries where it might be cold, but these examples here are from Denmark, and they are actually very well operating in a Danish context. And we are not necessarily the warmest or the most sunny country in the world. So there's actually some good options for this also globally. now when we have our renewables, we can use a bunch of different thermal storages we can have. And all of these now with low temperature or lower temperature, we can use these kind of seasonal storages. So while we get all these different renewable sources into our system, that can be geothermal, solar, it can be waste heat from industry, it can be excess heat from the supermarket. All of this can be stored seasonally, because a lot of these things will happen that we have a lot of sun in the summer, or we'll have, for instance, and we'll have a lot of excess heat from industry in the summer, but we don't have the demand because it's not warm enough. Or sorry, it's too warm, so it's not cold enough for us to have heating demands. So when that's the case, we need to make sure we have the storages. And here again, by having lower temperature, we are able to utilize many more storage technologies. And depending on your current underground situations or facilities, a lot of different options are available. It can be pit thermal storages, borehole. We can just have tanks installed either underground or overground. Some of this, like the tank storage, might be more short-term, while the other might be long-term storages for the shifting heating production from the summer to covering demands in the winter. So to show and illustrate these kind of technologies in the system, I would like to talk here in the end about a plan for 4th generation district heating in Denmark, in the city of Aalborg, that we've been working on a year ago or something similar to that. And we try to estimate how can we actually use 4th generation district heating, and what are the advantages of doing this in terms of technologies, in terms of all things considered. Currently, the Aalborg system is the 3rd generation district heating, and it looks something like this. It is very much coal based. We are supplying by a big central coal power station, and this also delivers a lot of heating, as you can see, to industry, coal to industry, and then we have a lot of heating here that this CHP plant delivers, and the main heating comes from this, and excess heat mainly from industry. So this is the current system in Aalborg. And what we want to do is we want to transition this into renewable energy. So we limited biomass use. We included transport, both local and global transportation, and we use the industrial demand related to inhabitants. And this is because Aalborg has a very big cement industry, and it has a potential for a lot of excess heat that we will use in the plant, but it also has a lot of coal consumption and fuel consumption that if Aalborg had to consider this, then the only thing we would have to do in the plan was basically transitioning this plant. But else what we wanted to do is we wanted to include low temperature district heating, so we had better efficiencies in our heat pumps and we had lower losses in our district heating grid. However, now we needed to invest in heat savings in our system. So first of all, we investigated heat savings. We found, based on the geographic analysis, and we found a situation where we could identify savings that were cheaper, marginal savings that actually resulted in cheaper costs than the marginal supply temperature. So we used this marginal cost curve to identify a saving potential. And then we compared this with the building stock, so we can actually do the concrete analysis on what kind of buildings we had to save in. And especially, as you can see here, most of the activity are in buildings in Denmark that are from before 1973, which is also in relation to when we actually started doing heat planning in Denmark. So this is where most of the savings are being done. Then we made a concrete analysis of where do we have industrial waste heat. And this is not only from the big cement factory. We already have that in Denmark, but we also looked at how can we increase the big cement factory? How can we get different kinds of technologies in from the supermarkets, from the water treatment plant, all these things, getting that into the system. And we increase the total potential because of 4th generation district heating, and because of a lot of new sources we now have access to. We increased it from 1,200 terajoules of potential excess heat to 3,100. And this potential some of it will already be available today. We don't have to necessarily build 4th generation district heating to get to all of it. And then we made an analysis and said, well, around 2,600 terajoule is accessible for the system. So this is what we will use in the analysis. Finally, we have heat pumps and geothermal, and here we estimate 100 megawatt. These can either be supplied by geothermal or seawater, because there's a river close to Aalborg. And we have 20 megawatts of heat pumps, as I said, running on this waste heat from industry, helping there, so to boost the temperature a little bit. And we have a 40 gigawatt hour seasonal storage in our system. And this means that our district heating supply changes from being predominantly based on the CHP, the combined heat and power plant, and instead goes into being predominantly produced by waste heat and waste incineration and heat pumps. So those are the main technologies now that is supplying our future system based on load generation. So we are actually almost completely free of CHP, and we are completely free of coal in our system, which not only benefits the you can say the CO2 emissions, but also benefits a lot the particle matter and the air pollution potentially also. So we also are dealing with those things in the same manner. So overall, we shift completely to this smart energy system in Aalborg instead. And now if you look at the heating system, as I said, we have a lot more waste heat. We have nothing really. We have a little bit coming from CHP, but it's based on gas now instead of being based on coal. And this gas is also partly renewably produced from biogas or from gasification. And we have some coming from heat pumps and geothermal, so we have electricity being utilized here to supply, but predominantly this is the case. Finally, we did a number of analysis just to illustrate what happens if we have no low temperature district heating. This is the whole point. If we cannot get to low temperature district heating, what happens? So first of all, we looked at, okay, what if we had our system, but we had 3rd generation district heating? So now we couldn't operate our heat pumps as efficiently. We couldn't have we couldn't have access to the same kind of thermal storages. Our heat pumps wasn't as efficient. There was more losses in our system. Well, this actually meant that we now ended up in a situation where it will cost us a little more because we needed to have more boilers invested. We needed more CHP plants potentially, more heat pumps in our system. We needed to supply the efficiency gains from going to 4th generation, and we saved a little bit on equipment and district heating and retrofitting, but it wasn't really. You can say the system cost of a 4th generation district heating network is not necessarily more expensive over a long period of time than a 3rd generation. It's just more insulated. So it's a little bit of extra cost, but these savings didn't outweigh, you can say, the extra cost of now having to supply more heat. Then we looked at what happens if we take away no savings, if we didn't do any savings in our 1st generation district heating. And yes, we can now save a bunch of money on not saving in our system, but we also now have to invest even more because we have even less efficient heating supply. Now we need even more heat pumps. We need even more heat production. The next step is that we looked at what if we didn't have the excess heat from Aalborg Portland. And as you can see, this is actually the lowest benefit in the sense that in the Aalborg system, there's a lot of excess heat, and this competes with heat pumps, but we don't need to use that necessarily. And if Aalborg Portland shuts down, it of course becomes a little more expensive if we don't have it, but we can still supply it efficiently with heat pump. And finally, what we looked at is if we have no district heating at all. So if we had only individual heating, and we had to supply all this with individual heat pumps, and we think this is a key statement to this, then the system becomes much more expensive. So district heating helps in making cost-efficient heating solutions for users, but it also helps in making cost-efficient transitions to renewable energy systems, because having individual supply of heat pumps with the associated grid costs, and even though these are kind of similar to the district heating costs, it just increases the total investments and how much money you have to put into the system overall. So to conclude and summarize what I have talked about, it is technically possible both to have district heating, but also to increase it and become more efficient by going to lower temperatures. It has both technical benefits that we can have better efficiencies, but there's also socioeconomic benefits in the sense that we can actually achieve a cheaper supply solution. But this requires planning, because district heating are long-term projects. It takes when you do this for a long time period. So of course, planning for this, making sure the buildings fit, making sure you have the right supply technology is key. Thank you. That was my last slide, and thank you for allowing me to present.
好的，谢谢 Mr. Jacob 先生的这个精彩的演讲啊。接下来呢，我们有请来自欧洲地热能源委员会的 Mr. Miklos 做发言。Mr. Miklos 先生在设计、规划还有管理这个深层地热方面有着非常丰富的经验，有30多年以上的经验。他从这个2018年起就担任这个欧洲地热能源理事会的主席。在这个国际暑期学校和研讨会上也讲授了这个地热资源的可持续发展方面的很多这个演讲。在这个 IGA 的董事会也任职了2届，撰写了大量的这个多种语言的这个技术论文和教科书。应该说，在我们这个全球的这个地热这个能源方面具有非常影响力的一位人物啊。接下来的时间，我们就欢迎 Mr. Miklos 先生做精彩的发言。
Yes. Good afternoon in China. Good morning in Europe. Well, thank you very much for your nice introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to talk to you about the technical challenges and solutions for integrating low temperature geothermal energy resources and lessons learned from France. Well, in our today's talk, I'm going to give you, of course, a short outline of the European geothermal projects in operation. As I am the president of EGEC, I have the duty to speak to you about Europe. Of course, I will give you about the Paris Basin geothermal district heating system, some figures and developments. Economics. I'm going to speak to you about innovation, which we have brought in the time in enhancing geothermal heat production and securing well integrity, and then I will come to you with the conclusions. Well, why geothermal heat is so important? Well, we have in all our heat primary energy consumption, we have heat 47%, electricity 21%, and 32% we use for transport. And this 47% of heat, we spend it most in households, 42%, then in industry, in services, in agriculture, and in other uses. Well, this is a figure which has been published in 2013, but it hasn't changed too much. How can we supply this heat by sustainable energy sources like geothermal? Geothermal heating and cooling technologies are available since long time. My speaker before has given you a great outline of all the technologies available. I just want to recapitulate that geothermal energy, you can harness it by deploying with heat pumps, with deep geothermal energy systems, district heating and cooling, like in the Paris area, by direct uses in agri-industry, which are largely populated in the Netherlands, We can use underground thermal energy storage, which are available everywhere, especially in Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and Sweden. And then you have the EGS, or enhanced geothermal system, or engineered geothermal system. There's only one system working now in Europe, in Soultz-Forêt in France, where you can produce electricity and heat, combined heat and heating and power. Well, geothermal, I will give you some key figures from the market report published in 2019. This is an activity of EGEC, which comes out every 2 years. We have in 2019, we have 130 geothermal plants for electricity with a capacity factor of 84%. Just bear in mind that geothermal is available 24/7, 365 days a year. Then we have passed 2 gigawatt thermal threshold for geothermal heating systems. We have more than 300 geothermal district heating systems and greenhouses, and we have more than 2 million geothermal heat pumps in Europe at the end of 2019. Well, in 2019, geothermal lithium extraction has also started at the pilot scheme in Europe. And here you can see a map with all the deep geothermal district heating and cooling in megawatts installed by country and the electricity installed in Europe. Of course, the leading countries are among they are Iceland and Turkey, which have high temperature resources, followed for electricity by Italy. But we should not forget leading countries on continental Europe for France and Germany. Well, here is a map with the distribution of all European countries with respect to number of district heating and cooling installations all over Europe. You can see that France is leading by about 60 installations, district heating installations in operation today, and there are 40 more to plan in the next 5 years. And we can and new grids which are planned for 2025, about taking into account about 20 kilometers per grid. We are looking at 4,000 kilometers of geothermal district heating. Well, the budget to be spent for new geothermal district operation is 4,000 million euros, is 4 billion euros. So it's a big business all over Europe. And why it is? Because more than 25% of the European Union population lives in areas directly suitable for geothermal district heating. Here you can see all the a map published by the GeoDH project from the European Technological Innovation Deep Geothermal Project, where you can see all the capacities installed all over Europe for district heating. This is another map which has been realized within the same project, where it is mapped the potential, the reservoir, the type of reservoir against district heating systems. So we can see a very good match of existing district heating systems, which are plotted here in this small dot in pink dot. You can see a large number of district heating systems, especially Central and Eastern Europe, and then which could be very well matched with the previous with the hot sedimentary aquifers, which are all located in a quite high density here. So there is an enormous potential to be developed, and it is all related to the reservoir conditions. Now coming back to France. France, the biggest the Paris area is the world's biggest geothermal development today. It is based on a large sedimentary basin, an intracratonic, a large sedimentary basin, which has a series of geothermal reservoirs. If you take from top, we have shallow tertiary aquifers, we have lower Cretaceous aquifers, and the largest developed aquifer is the Doga Reservoir for district heating. New aquifer like the Triassic Reservoir is also targeted in future exploration projects. So on this map, this is the blue color layer, which is the reservoir which is targeted for the Doga. Here is a map of the distribution of district heating systems all around Paris area. We do not have geothermal district heating system Paris intramuros, that means inside Paris, and because of the high density of urbanization and locations there. But most of the geothermal district heatings are located in southern part of Paris, where the reservoir is a bit hotter. In the eastern part, there is even hotter. And also we have a several number of geothermal district heating systems located in the northern part of Paris, where the reservoir is not as hot. Temperatures vary here in the north from 60 to 70. In the south, we vary from 65 to 80 degrees, and in the east, we have higher temperatures than 80 degrees in some doublets. Well, the new, I would say, El Dorado in the code for the Paris geothermal district heating is the Western Paris development, but here we have less favorable reservoir properties and reservoir characteristics, which makes it more difficult to develop as a new exploration scheme. Well, how a geothermal doublet operates, you have seen it and heard it all over the talks today. Well, we do have a doublet, a production well, and an injection well, both drilled from the same platform. And then in the production well, we do have these are deviated to provide a certain distance at the impact of the reservoir in order to avoid the thermal breakthrough. And then we have a production well, and then we have a heat exchanger, a heat plant, and an injection well where the hot water is, when the cold water is reinjected. Then we have a distribution grid with substations, and water is circulated all over and recovered and reinjected recovered and recirculated in the secondary grid. So the geothermal, we have a geothermal loop, and then we have the district heating loop. I will show you later. Well, just a bit of historical milestones of the Paris Basin development. We have had the births, we call it, in the years of 1969 to 1980, where we have the first geothermal doublet in 1969. Then we had the period of infantile disease from 1980 to 1990, where we have had 50 doublets completed. We had several thermochemical damage because the water we produce in the Paris area is a hostile, is a water which contains H2S and CO2. It's with a low pH, and it's a hostile chemistry for corrosion and scaling. Then we have had, of course, problems with the electro-submersible pumps, bore management, and then lots of problems with the economics. Of course, Trias already was targeted in that period, that deeper reservoir, but they all failed. Then we had the teenage learning, as we call it, where we had 21 doublets which were shut down because they were non-economic, and then there were tremendous problems which had to be solved all over the time. And then we had an era where geothermal was combined with gas to provide cogeneration, but this proved in time not to be economic. Well, we have reached in the year 2000 the maturity of geothermal district heating, where we had a long learning curves, and you can say more than 20 years of solving problems, stabilize the financing, design, sustainable design, and feasible and cost-effective drilling and repair technologies. Well, what do we look forward in the next period after 2020? And I must say that the geothermal development in Paris area performed quite well. It is that we have achieved what we have planned. We have now 60 doublets in operation. We have produced more than 2,000 gigawatt thermals a year, and then we are heating more than 1 million people in households all over Paris. Of course, we deploy now modern reservoir engineering, integrated reservoir engineering approaches in order to assess, plan, and design our doublets. This is a typical heat load curve where the target is to cover with 66% the district heating need with geothermal. You can see that 56% geothermal alone can cover it. This is an example for district heating doublet with 300 cubic meters an hour at 64 degrees Celsius website with a 2 megawatt rated heat pump. And then we have a heat pump on top, so we can cover 69%, and the rest is covered by a reduced number of hours. It's covered by heat and by the natural gas. Most of the system operated like that. As I said, this is an example of well architectures. All the wells, as I said, they are drilled from the same platform. We have a distance between 10 meters between the wellheads. We distinguish the injection well from the production well by the fact that the production well has a pumping chamber, which is a larger diameter, in order to install a large capacity heat pump. We have moved in 2018 to new well architectures. We have achieved the world first premier sub-horizontal doublet in designing and planning doublet on a site which has been producing geothermal energy since 1984. And these doublets, there were two doublets in place which were producing a flow rate of 350 cubic meters an hour, and they were replaced by one single doublet which has a new capacity of 450 cubic meters an hour by drilling sub-horizontal drains by crossing all the layers of the reservoir over 1 kilometer. These technologies now are proven. It's commissioned since 2 years now, and it's working pretty well. As I said, the water is corrosive and it has lots of problems. For that, we have designed fiberglass lined geothermal wells, which is a steel propping casing and inserted with a fiberglass liner with free suspension on the bottom and compression on the top. The advantage of this system is that the geothermal water does not enter in contact with the steel casing, so it's a low maintenance well, and it does not need chemical injection line. Like in the figure here, all the wells which are steel cased are benefiting of a chemical injection line to inject an inhibitor in order to protect the well integrity for a long period of time. And now these lines became intelligent. We have fiber optics included in the line and downhole monitoring gauges in order to monitor reservoir properties and well integrity. So technology, smart well concept have been evaluated in real time. This is a typical example of the Paris location. As you can see, we are all in urbanized area. We are working in cities with lots of inhabitants. So especially environmental aspects are very important. This is an emblematic figure of Port Saint Cloud, and you can see of the River of the Seine. This doublet no longer is in operation, but you can see the rig and the Eiffel Tower behind. And here is a geothermal doublet in a park. So you cannot even see where the geothermal doublet is unless you indicate it somewhere. So it's not so easy working in urbanized area, but these doublets, most of them provide heating from 5 to 10,000 inhabitants all over. Well, design and monitoring, of course, we have to monitor the loop, and we have to monitor the geothermal district heating grid as well. So all is well synchronized and well trimmed, and all the grid parameters are adapted accordingly in order to assure monitoring. These are the design feature of the geothermal loop, and which shows you the main components, as I explained before: the electrosubmersible pump, the filters, the heat exchanger, and the injection pump. All is frequency variable frequency drive, and it's controlled by the outside temperature. Well, where we came from renovation. Before we had this, like this is a photo taken in my hometown in Oradea, and these are gas boilers, and this we moved from gas boilers for replacing the grids with a large cost of capital investment, about 1,000 euros a meter. What is the problem with if we talk about economics? The capital, it's very capital intensive. We have to spend more than €1 million per kilometer in order to develop new district heating. Well, new district heating systems are easy to achieve in some places, or much more difficult, but they are already integrated in the environment. Existing district heating systems are already obsolete, so most of the time they need to be entirely renovated and converted to low temperature geothermal systems. Especially in the Central Eastern Europe countries, we have insufficient, unpredictable revenues, high costs, high commercial risk, limited access to capital, and degraded castles. It is about the same in France. When you have to renovate an old grid, you have the same problem. District cooling networks are more and more popular, and they are developing, and they are long-term investment, and they are integrated in such so-called smart grid systems. And then, well, most of the case, as we are very capital intensive, there is insufficient subsidy, and in most of the cases, not enough carbon pricing for decarbonizing. Well, here is an example for typical cost breakdowns for a geothermal operation, which includes the mining costs, which are related to the well, to the geothermal loop, the geothermal heat exchanger, the surface, the secondary loop. And then we have the operating and expenditures, which are summarized here. They're the power, the light maintenance, and the chemicals, and also the grid monitoring, maintenance, and depreciation. Well, you can see that we are, for the worst case, we have to invest 25 million euros in a new grid. We are speaking about 1,600,000 euros of OPEX. If we have no subsidies, we end up with a break-even price of 81 euros a megawatt hour. If we have a medium case where we have to invest 23 million euros, and then we have to spend 1,400,000 for operating, and we have 25% of subsidy, then we have a break-even of 64%. Well, this is a study which has been completed by ADEME, which shows that geothermal district heating is very competitive compared to biomass and waste incinerate, biomass and other energy systems. And this encourages now many operators in France to develop geothermal district heating projects. Well, this is a breakdown of capital expenditure when while commissioning before commissioning the plant, and this is how much money you need to spend all over the time until you get it in online. So we have the same figures, but they're distributed in a scale. We do have a national fund which contributes to about 20% subsidies from geothermal district heating, which is maintained, and there is a system of energy efficiency certificates which are also in place. Crowdfunding has been also deployed in new projects, and it proved to be attractive on one of the projects in Europe, in France, which has been reported, and which is very well received because it involves cities and local authorities in the concept and then, well, this is a bit the risk and failure success criteria. This depends very much on the well, geothermal is no secret. We have the flow rate and the temperature we need to obtain, provided that we have the right parameters for flow rate and higher temperatures. Then we are all about success. And if we are below, very below, we are a failure. We do have partial success and partial failure, which are all related also to the economical figures given below, the capex, the opex, and the selling price and the internal rate of the return. Well, of course, Paris Basin, we know it pretty well from a long time, more than 40 years now. But we still have challenges which we have to address. We have to go on sectoral lithostratic correlation in order to mitigate the mining risk, to reprocess existing seismic lines, to go to innovative well architectures, which I showed you, then go to exploration, to site new wells to deeper aquifers in order to obtain higher temperatures and provide energy on cities which are already need more district heating. Then the biggest problem now it is to have an eligible drill site because of the urbanization. It is very difficult now to have a 3,000 or 4,000 square meter available to set up a drilling project. And then innovation, continuous innovation brings to the success of geothermal district heating in France and everywhere. Well, I would just conclude here in telling you that geothermal district heating and geothermal has been proven renewable, sustainable, and achievable and realistic. And this is one of the future energy sources which has to be integrated more and more in district heating and decarbonization of heating and cooling in Europe and all over the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miklos。那么接下来呢，我们有请来自于西安建筑科技大学建筑设备科学与工程学院的李安贵院长为我们分享，他今天的这个题目是供热制冷能源输配系统减土降耗的新方法。李院长呢，是我们西安建筑大学建筑设备科学与工程学院的院长，主要从事这个室内通风和地下环境保障方面的研究，是中国突出贡献的中青年专家和百千万人才工程的国家级的人选，应该说也是在我们行业内非常知名的专家，他从事的多项研究工作。都获得了就是这个获得的就是国家重大科技攻关项目有50余项，获得的这个授权的发明专利71项，也是我们享受中国国务院政府特殊津贴的这个专家。下面有请李院长做精彩发言，有请。
Okay. Yeah, can you see me? Yeah, can you see the screen?
Okay,
please?
okay.
Okay. Oh, distinguished, distinguished guests. Okay. I'm very pleased to join this conference on the webinar. You know, now at the time in China, it's the afternoon, but in European time, it's the morning. I'm glad to have the chance to share our team's work. Okay, as you can see on the screen, the outline of my presentation is as follows. Okay. There are 4 points. Okay, point 1 and the background. Okay, you can see, you know, in China, at present, building energy consumption in China accounts for occupied approximately more than 20% of the total energy consumption. This is a very huge number, okay? A very large amount of energy consumption. But of which the resistance of the HVAC system, HVAC means heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, accounts for 15 to 30% of the building energy consumption. So this also is a very large number. But, you know, again, the local drag resistance, that means the transmission system contributes with more than 50% of the contribute more than 50. That means, you know, the drag resistance is a very important. Okay, and additionally, the resistance of the HVAC, the drag resistance is also related to the safe production of for the industry. So it's a very important problem. You know, the previous experts, many previous experts focus on the strategies for energy saving. I would like to speak on the technology. Okay, but the things that this issue is very complicated. You know, but there is a problem. The journey of our South Mars starts with a single step. Okay. Okay, that's the background. Okay, you know, look here. You know, the ducts. You know, the HVAC ducts look like the maze. Okay, very complicated. So a lot of energy will be consumed. Generally speaking, the bad design and the bad manufacture and the bad installation, and finally, and the bad operation normally contribute a lot to the energy consumption. So what we should do is try to, from the energy saving the prospect, we are going to try to find our ways, find some new technology to reduce or decrease the energy consumption from the, from the HVAC, the pumping systems. So generally speaking, there are 4 aspects, 4 ways, 4 methods to lower down, to reduce, the pumping resistance, such as the turning wing drag reduction, rectifier drag reduction, and duct and the surface. We can change the duct surface to reduce the drag reduction, and the other types of drag reduction. Now in China, we have been focused on the resistance reduction for many years, for over 20 years. This is the turning wing drag reduction method. It's a very open used. The rectifier drag reduction also the commonly used, in HVAC system. This is a very important ways to reduce, the popping or duct resistance. We can change the surface shape. We can the surface shape. For example, normally the duct can be made in a circular way or rectangular way. We can change the shapes. The more important, we can change the the components such as the arbons or the T-junctions. This is the other type of drag reduction. We can use the drag to reduce the agent. That's background. Our teams, as I mentioned earlier, our teams have been focused on the research, focused on the the drag reduction over 20 years. And now here is a short group of people. That's my PhD students or master students. That's their that's their thesis title. Over 20 years, from the CFD modeling to experimental prediction, and the 2-dimensional PRV test, and so on. This is also my teams. My team's research group. My research group that have been focused on this reduction, the energy for the energy saving, for the piping, the resistance, the reduction over 20 years. So this is a friction serial, friction losses serial, because today most people are focused on the strategy. This is just a short introduction. This is a drag reduction serial. The local resistance coefficient for HVAC components is used to evaluate the resistance reduction effectiveness. So we can use the local resistance coefficient to evaluate the system is it good or not. This energy dissipation caused by vortex. The essence of a local component resistance reduction is to reduce energy dissipation caused by the air vortex. That means controlling the airflow of the vortex means to reduce the resistance and the power consumption. But there are many factors to influence the resistance. For example, here is the air velocity. The air velocity have a have a direct effect on the local resistance. From your left, you can see if the air velocity is less than, generally speaking, if less than 15 the meters per second. Okay, the resistance will be strongly influenced by the air velocity. But if the air velocity is more than the 15 meters per second, then the resistance can be made, generally speaking, can be remain constant. However, for HVAC system, for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, normally the air velocity is much less than 15 meters per second. Okay, normally the 5 to 10 meters per second air velocity. That means, the resistance always changing with the air velocity. The temperature, the air temperature also have some influence on the resistance. Okay, you can see it. Okay. Normally, our temperature for HVAC system normally from the 7 Celsius degree to the 50 Celsius degree. That's for heating, ventilation, and the air conditioning system. That's for air duct. If for the water pipes or for water pipes, it normally the water can be changed from the negative, the 25 Celsius degree to the positive 200 Celsius degree. Different, we can take the the airballs as example. Different aspect ratio. You can have a different influence. Okay. Okay. The different. That means, from our findings, the aspect ratio can be remained at less than 4, less 4. Then the resistance will be will be low, or the resistance will be good, or will be quite low. If the aspect ratio is more than 4, then the resistance will increase rapidly. Okay, this is the coverage radius, the influence to the resistance. Okay, generally speaking, the inside the tube, inside the duct, the airflow is not uniform. Okay, so we try to to keep the the airflow in uniform way to reduce the resistance. Now for airborne resistance, the different connections, multi-airborne effect. Okay, different connections will have a direct influence to the resistance. Here is the example of the coupled airballs. Here, if we, the problem is how to optimize. The problem is how to optimize, the shape of the airballs. We can change the, the different shapes, such as, the airball arc. such as the airball arc. You know, this is for the inner arc, okay? Also the outer arc, okay, or the exterior of the arc shapes. For example, if the change, you know, the airball arc, you know, the resistance can be, for example, take the D, example D, the resistance can be reduced by 9.25, 9.21, okay, or more, no, more than 9, approximately 10%, the resistance will be reduced. Okay, we can use the airball extended. Okay, the airball extended. Okay, if the airball extended, then resistance can be, you know, can be reduced as much as 15%. This picture is a
就是我看您的 PPT 可能比较长，所以我看您把前面的
okay. But to save the time, okay. Okay. These are current airballs. These are low resistance airballs. These are the shapes, okay. The airball optimizes the curved shapes, okay. We can according to this shape, we can reduce the energy. Okay, this is a turn wind optimization. This is a cost. The cost analysis. You know, comprehensive cost analysis optimized, you know, the airball is equivalent, approximately the no, you know, cost is added, is equivalent to the traditional ones. These are optimized shapes for airballs. This is the turn winds for drag reduction. Look at the T-junction. Optimize. Okay, this is the optimized position for the T-junction. Okay, optimized shapes. Okay. This is the, you know, the air velocity, the contour for air velocity. You know, how to reduce, you know, the resistance. So by the different ways, okay, we can reduce the T-junction. Okay, both the T-junction and airballs, the resistance can be reduced. Okay. That's a kind of experimental test. Okay. There are two-dimensional PRV experiment. These are these are comparison of the PRV test and the CFD modeling. These are, you know, the different connecting types. Okay, the different you know, the drag reduction shapes for T-junction. The drag reducer different. Okay, this is optimized shape, the structure for the drag reducer. The drag reducer for the convex structures is as follows. Okay, for example, we can change the shapes. Okay, change the, you know, arc of the traditional junction to the new one, to the narrow one. Okay, this is some just some outcome of the narrow, the T-junctions, airballs, and so on. That is a narrow the components, okay, with a quite low the resistance. Okay, this is some from here you can see some of the components. Okay, we have tested for many years. So I would like to point out again, the local drag resistance is very important. Okay, it occupies a lot. Okay, it contributes a lot to the energy consumption for the building for the building energy, the efficiency. So the local the resistance of key components of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system can be really reduced by more than 10% by the the proper but the simple optimization. Okay, the novel method can be used or has been proposed in reduce the resistance and the energy consumption for the for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. Okay, that's the the main point of the introduction. Okay, the presentation. The time. Okay. Thank you. Okay, 3 minutes more. Okay, some presentation.
这里面呢，从李院长的这个做了大量接下来交流。I'm going to invite Angie to briefly share with us the experience between Iceland and China.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Now it's okay.
I can't hear you anymore. Okay.
Okay. Now it's okay. Okay. Can you hear me?
It's too much noise. It looks too much noise. Okay. I can't hear you clearly.
Okay. The connection is not very well. So next, I invite
Mr. Henderson. Can I ask you, please, Mr. Henderson?
Yes. Hello. Do you hear
Hi.
me?
This is much better.
Okay.
Okay. Very good. You can hear me.
A little bit.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you very clearly, but.
Okay. Should I start then?
You can start another. Okay, next one.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I'll keep this short and sweet. I know this is very late in the day. My name is Haukur Harðarsson, and I am the chairman and founder of Arctic Green Energy. We are a renewable energy knowledge company from Iceland, and we have been working in China for the last 15 years with Sinopec. Geothermal energy has been making very good inroads into the Chinese district heating systems. And today I want to share with you some of the experiences that we have had over the last 15 years in being on the forefront of this development. The largest company in our portfolio is our joint venture with Sinopec that is called Sinopec Green Energy. And this joint venture is today the world's largest and fastest growing geothermal district heating company. And just to share with you some of what we have done over the last 15 years, we have already connected over 60 million square meters of floor space to be heated in China with geothermal. We are doing this across 6 provinces and including in the new Chinese futuristic city of Xiong'an. And 60 million square meters is the same size as the land area of the country of San Marino on the Italian peninsula, or Manhattan Island in New York City. But we have also signed up another additional 300 million square meters of floor space to heat. That corresponds to the landmass of the country of Malta, or half the size of Singapore. We are not only the market leader in China in terms of size, but we are also the technical leader. We have registered over 80 patents and have been constantly introducing new concepts, such as when we introduced large-scale reinjection years ago in China. We have drilled over 700 wells in China with the average depth of 2.2 kilometers. But perhaps the number I'm most proud of is our contribution to decarbonization. We have, over the last decade, saved China and the world close to 13 million tons of CO2 emissions. And this shows the environmental value of using geothermal when it comes to heating and cooling. In addition to our commercial cooperations, we have also launched capacity training in China. We own, along with Sinopec and the National Energy Authority of Iceland, a UNESCO-branded university training program in geothermal that is located in Beijing. And to date, we have already graduated the first 50 students. Many of the teachers in this program come from Iceland. Perhaps the greatest contribution of our joint venture in China is the reconfirmation of what we have already known for decades in Iceland. And this is that geothermal energy is by far the least expensive of any of the renewables as a heat source for heating and cooling. And of course, much more profitable than the fossil fuels. And I'm not only talking about the environmental costs, but also pure economics when I state this. Geothermal energy is the only renewable that is baseload. And it can be argued that any future standalone renewable energy system will need a geothermal backbone, as all the others will need some form of energy storage. We believe at our joint venture in a concept we call Geothermal Plus, and there we use hydrothermal geothermal as a backbone of our systems, and we co-generate with other locally available renewables for heating and cooling solutions. We have also been making advances into district cooling, large-scale heat pumps, and electricity generation from low-temperature geothermal. And China has good potential for all of these other applications of geothermal. There have always been challenges along the road. One of the biggest ones we have had to face is that general knowledge about geothermal and how to harness it is relatively low among decision makers. And this is something that we see all over the world. This is not, that is just in China, this is everywhere. People know a lot about solar and wind, but general knowledge about geothermal is low. So much of our time in the past has gone into educating scientists and decision makers. Perhaps the most common misconception about geothermal is the belief that extracting geothermal brine from the ground will somehow have adverse effects if it's done properly. This, of course, is quite wrong. And I'm sure my colleagues in France can also confirm this and from other places in the world. Responsible companies in geothermal re-inject the fluid they take out of the ground. So we are not taking anything net from the underground layers except the heat. And the heat is constantly replenished by the core of the earth, which happens to be the same temperature as the surface of the sun. In our joint venture in China, we have always believed that the only way to harness geothermal is to do it in harmony with nature. And we call this concept resource first. We constantly monitor the status of our resources, the underground layers, and make sure that our operations are always in harmony with what nature can lend us. How cities are heated and cooled is one of the most significant energy challenges that we face. While much progress has been made around the world in powering electricity or generating electricity with renewables, the fact is that the largest part of the global final energy consumption is the consumption of heat. And heating and cooling remain one of the strongest fortresses of the fossil industry, because the renewables are still to make significant inroads into that, but there is a lot of potential. The cities of the future will have dual energy systems, highly synchronized. One carries electricity and the other carries hot water. Geothermal energy has proven to be the most effective way of heating the waterborne system. And I believe that over the next decades, geothermal energy will rise to be one of the leading energy sources in how cities are heated and cooled across the whole Eurasian continent. The future looks very bright for China when it comes to harnessing geothermal as a major source of heating for China's district heating systems. China has the largest known reservoirs of mid to low temperature geothermal of any country. And geothermal has the potential to contribute significantly to the vision of the Chinese government for carbon neutrality before 2060. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
I cannot hear anything.
Sorry.
I hope you heard me.
We cannot hear you.
I hope you heard me, Jack.
Yes, I heard you clearly. Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe as Mr. Yang tries to see whether he can get his sound back, we could just take one or two questions before we move to the last session of this workshop. And this is a question for Mr. Miklos Antiques. So you have made a presentation about how France has done so well with geothermal district heating. And you mentioned about the National Heat Fund. So the question is, to what extent do you think the National Heat Fund has contributed to the success of geothermal development in France, especially when it comes to addressing some of the technical challenges in the drilling process? Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Well, the National Heat Fund is set up to award subsidies for both drilling and also for the construction of the network. Globally, on average, and it's a project by project base. If a project is more risky, that means it requires more innovative drilling technologies, then the National Heat Fund via ADEME, which is the French Energy Agency, will give a larger proportion for the drilling aspect. We have benefited of that from the ADEME subsidy, especially for the drilling, when we have innovated by drilling the subhorizontal wells. If we go on a, let's say, standard project base of geothermal doublet, which is developed in the Paris area, the National Heat Fund will subsidize up to 25% the global investment in the in the geothermal doublet. This includes the wells and the construction of the network. We can reckon that there are areas where the construction of the network is started from scratch, and it needs a higher capex. In that situation, the capex from the heat fund, it's oriented more to the network than for the drilling operation. It's a project by project case, and it's analyzed so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Antix, for that response. Maybe we should just take one final question in the interest of time, and then we go to the conclusive session. And this question is for Mr. Jacob Delufsen, and this is regarding the renovation of buildings so that we can be able to use the low temperature renewables. And one of the things that we realize is that usually there's not a lot of coordination between the different stakeholders who are involved in this process. So we're just wondering, what are some of the thoughts that you can share on how to coordinate the renovation of our buildings and the use of renewables for heating and cooling?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, you're absolutely right that this can be very hard, and it's also a lot easier said than done to have a mass coordination. I think some of the things we can learn from is that the supply companies or utilities have a knowledge about heat consumption, and if we can somehow use that, this is our experience from what we've been doing, is that they are also interested in lowering heat consumption and having more efficient supply. So that can be a good way to maybe coordinate it through the supply facilities, because they have with more and more meter data and so on, they have access to knowledge that potentially can be very crucial for coordinating this. Else it's also down to local government, I think, to a large extent, energy ministries and so on, to also realize that it's not only about energy supply in the future, but also about energy demand reductions. So I think those are the two of the main things we can do, and then creating incentives that this will happen.
So thank you very much, Jacob, for that. So I think at this time we should go to the last part of the workshop, whereby we are going to take some reflections on the presentations that were made today and also the discussions that took place. So a lot has been said by our distinguished panelists, and the participants have also posed some very, very useful questions for our panelists. And we've also had the intervention from Mr. Hakur, whereby he has made a very passionate case for geothermal and how it can contribute more to the decarbonization of the heating systems in China. So at this time, I want to invite Professor Brian Bud-Matheson and Professor Jianjun Xia to share with us their perspectives for district heating and cooling before we close the workshop. So Professor Matheson and Professor Xia, the floor is yours. Please give us your perspectives.
Thank you very much for that. It's been a very extensive program so far, and I think we have seen that there are really vast possibilities for including renewable energy in the portfolio of district heating in China. I think it's very clear from our overview of the situation in China right now, but also from our presentations today about the perspectives of renewable energy, that the foundations for decarbonizing the heating system are in place in China. As opposed to many other countries around the globe, China has a very positive attitude towards district heating infrastructure and has also been developing this for decades. There are also plans to expanding district heating grids in the future and plans to mandatorily put in renewable energy into the district heating areas. I find it very positive to see that there's a heavy focus on solar thermal and also a heavy potential and focus on geothermal. Although I also see that there are some challenges in the regulatory frameworks for implementing technologies such as geothermal due to the high investment costs compared to the current system where the operation costs are high. I think that it may be necessary to address the high investment costs in the Chinese regulatory framework to enable a decarbonization. I would highly promote an idea to accelerate the targets for renewable energy in China based on the presentations we have seen today, due to the very big potential to decarbonize the district heating systems. I find it very positive to see so many non-biomass renewable energy sources as well in China. It is not constructive to move towards renewable energy and base this on bioenergy. We should use solar thermal, geothermal, heat pumps, waste heat, all of the sources that we can see are not being combusted and are not an unsustainable source to be using. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Xianyuan.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you for all our experts, which are bringing us really excellent presentations. And I can see that we really learned a lot and shared a lot of knowledge and information between all of us. We can see that most of the countries like Europe, also China, we put our biggest efforts trying to reach for low carbon sustainable development. And within that part, actually, I think we have a lot of common understandings. And we believe that is quite important. And here, I think, as Brian said, we have a lot of different kind of resources and the different kind of technologies. And I believe that in China, because it's so big countries and each different places, cities have a different kind of situation. So that's why we believe that we should, based on the different situation, the resources, the demand side, and trying to find the most suitable solutions for all of us. But meanwhile, we can say that we have also some quite common methods. All of us agree that we should do some top design, trying to lead the targets and trying to, according to the targets, and trying to set up some action plan and doing some demand side analysis, trying to reduce for the demand for the district cooling and the heating. And also we're looking for how we could match with our resources with the demand side and the balancing. So that's why there's a lot of the storage and so on becomes extremely important. I think also we should not forget that the policy is so important. So how we could compete with the renewable energy with conventional coal and the fossil energy, and the policy that we need to do on that. And also looking on these pricing issues and so on. So I think a good part from China that we have some advantage because we do have the largest district heating network all over the world. Most of the cities in China, in the northern part, the district heating network already existing. So which means that we have less investments would be last for in the future. We start trying to combine with the renewable energy to our existing district heating network. And I also agree with that we should treat for the district heating like some public service so that we could have more support from the government trying to support for this kind of infrastructure installations, and trying to help us to reduce for the cost and investment and so on. So definitely, I think for this workshop, we do learn quite a lot. And I fully agree with Brian that we should set up some action plan in the future so that what we could do more in detail or some more actively in the future, trying to reach for these low carbon targets. Thank you. I think that's all for my part.
Thank you very much, Professor Brian and Professor Jianzhu. Now, I want to invite Mr. Amjad Abdullah, the Head of Partnerships at IRENA, to make his closing remarks, and also to invite Mr. Yan Binzung to close the workshop. Mr. Abdullah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jack Kiruja. Distinguished participants, it's been a long day, I'm sure. I mean, for most of us, I gather that it has been extremely useful workshop today on the topic of integrating renewable energy sources in district heating and cooling. We hope that the knowledge that has been shared and the experiences exchanged would definitely contribute to the energy transition of the heating and cooling sectors in the Republic of China. Because this workshop was organized by IRENA in collaboration with Aalborg University and with the support of Chinese Renewable Energy Engineering Institute. Obviously, we would have wanted to have this workshop in person, as you may understand that because of the nature of the pandemic, we are having this in a virtual mode. But I do hope that in the near future we can indeed conduct a physical workshop so that we can at least humanly interact each other. The workshop took place under the framework of the Energy Solutions for Cities and of the Future, a project which is supported by the German government through the International Climate Initiative, ICI. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank Aalborg University for their extended collaboration in organizing this important workshop. They've also been IRENA's partner in the development of the guidebook for policymakers on integrating low temperature renewables in district energy systems. My thanks also goes to our distinguished speakers for taking their valuable time to prepare and present during this extremely important workshop. Your presentations were extremely informative, highly motivated with the participants, and we believe that will contribute to an accelerated deployment of renewable energies in Chinese district heating networks. To our partners again, in China, the National Energy Administration and Chinese Renewable Energy Engineering Institute, your cooperation with IRENA is highly appreciated. The workshop would not have been possible without generous and overwhelming support of our focal points in Korea. I also would like to thank all the attendees for your active and constructive engagement during the entire day. I know it's been very long, but we do really appreciate your participation and engagement. To the IRENA colleagues who have supported behind the scenes, not to name it, but I think it would be missed, that I wanted to extremely thank my colleague, Jack Karuja, and the Asia team for organizing and coordinating throughout the workshop, and thank for ensuring that the proceedings ran extremely smoothly. Finally, I extend IRENA's gratitude to ICI, whose support made this project possible. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great pleasure to welcome the Vice Chief Engineer of New Energy at Korea, Ms. Hongwen Zi, to make her remarks and close the workshop. Over to you, Ms. Hongwen. Thank you very much.
现在能听到吗？
可以，
可以听到。
OK，
现在好多了，好了。
那个因为技术问题啊，刚才断了一会儿。我那个首先还是感谢Mr. Jack and Mr. Abdullah， 感谢他们对水电水利规划设计总院的信任和邀请啊，让我们共同参与了这次活动。也特别感谢来自国家能源局以及我们中外各方的相关的专家和代表，给我们做了这个非常丰富的，然后内容非常充实的，然后也非常精彩的这个演讲，特别感谢。另外呢，我想简要的说一下我们的一些期待。大家都知道，今年是中国提出碳中和之后的第一个年头，同时也是中国第“十四五”规划的第一个年头。我们水电水利规划设计总院正在根据国家能源局的相关安排，在编制中国可再生能源“十四五”规划的工作。我想的话，在这种背景下，“十四五”可再生能源的发展，应该会有一个非常好的预期。我也期待在可再生能源“十四五”规划的过程中，针对于可再生能源的制冷和制热方面，能够有更好的目标和导向。今年或者是在今后很长一段时间内，可再生能源应该说都是中国未来能源发展的一个主力。那么我们水电水利设计规划设计总院也非常期待与IRENA能够持续开展合作。我想今天这个活动是我们和IRENA的第一个活动，今天取得了非常好的开端。中国有句话叫良好的开端是成功的一半，所以我们期待在今后的合作过程中能够跟IRENA保持持续的合作。可能后续我们还会在中国国家能源局的安排下和IRENA保持紧密的沟通，希望能够推动更多的主题更加丰富的活动，也期待各位专家能够给我们提供指导，也希望我们中外各方的朋友致力于关心推动全球可再生能源发展的各位朋友同仁能够积极参与我们的活动。好，谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Hongwen. Thank you. The meeting is closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you. See you next time.
Yeah. Bye. See you next time.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.